The Terran ships moved like living things, swimming through space. They surrounded the Zorathian fleet, not attacking yet, just containing them. James gave one more warning: leave now. Take your equipment and go. The Aquans will keep what you've already harvested as compensation for the damage you've caused. But you leave now, or we take everything. The Zorathian commander made a fatal miscalculation. He assumed the humans were bluffing. He ordered his ships to continue firing, to break through the blockade, to defend their legal right to continue operations. The ocean of Aquos answered. Even weakened, even dying, it still had strength. Water rose from the two remaining oceans, reached into space, and touched the Zorathian ships. And everywhere that water touched, shields failed. Cooling systems froze. Life support shut down. The massive harvesters, each one worth billions of credits, simply stopped working. The harvesting equipment lowered from the ships like massive straws. They touched the ocean surface, and the water began to flow upward. Not in violent spurts, but in smooth, controlled streams that defied gravity. The technology was beautiful in its own way, Sarah had to admit. The water spiraled up in graceful helixes, catching the sunlight and creating rainbows. Readings are stable, her assistant, Marcus, said from the monitoring station. Water temperature normal. Marine life in the area showing expected avoidance behavior but no signs of distress. Sarah nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling of wrongness. She had spent her entire life studying the ocean, and watching it being sucked into alien ships felt like witnessing a violation. Belongs to Kefir, 9. Leave now and tell your people what happened here. Tell them the oceans have learned to fight back. The Zorathian survivors fled the system as fast as their rescue pods could manage. They carried with them a story that would spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Earth, the forgotten world, the cautionary tale, had become something new. Something dangerous. Sarah descended to the surface of Kefir, 9 in a small craft. The world was beautiful, covered almost entirely in water, with only a few volcanic islands breaking the surface. The native species were aquatic mammals, intelligent but pre-technological, living in vast family groups that sang to each other in complex harmonies. She dove into the ocean without breathing equipment. She didn't need it anymore. Thalassa's influence had changed her body in subtle ways. Harvested from 473 worlds. We are experts. Your climate will experience minor fluctuations, nothing more. We have detailed environmental impact assessments. Your scientists may review them. The assessments had been reviewed. They looked professional, filled with data and projections. The Galactic Council had approved the Zorathian Collective as a legitimate merchant empire. There were regulations, laws, oversight committees. On paper, everything looked safe. Maria looked around the room at the faces of her fellow leaders. She saw hope in some eyes, fear in others. China's Premier Chen was nodding slowly. The African Union representative was frowning. Russia's president was already checking documents on his tablet. General Park, the Assembly's chairman, made the final decision. We didn't gain this power to hide in our own system. We gained it to make sure what happened to us never happens again. Send the fleet to Aquos. And send a message to the Galactic Council. Tell them we're coming. The oceanic fleet grew. More ships were grown from Thalassa's matter, each one crewed by humans who had bonded with the planetary consciousness. They trained in the deep places of Earth's oceans, learning to move between dimensions, to sense water across vast distances, to fight in ways that conventional militaries couldn't comprehend. Sarah led the training personally. She had become something more than human, more than just Thalassa's partner. She was a bridge between species, between worlds, between the old ways and the new. Her body glowed faintly blue now, even on land. Her eyes could see in complete darkness. She could hear the songs of oceans light years away. Around the world, humanity began the long process of mourning. Memorials were built. Names were carved into stone. The dead were honored. But beneath the grief, something else was growing. Something cold and hard and patient. The oceans continued to die, but they were not empty. In the deepest trenches, where the Zorathian extractors had carved the deepest wounds, something ancient was beginning to stir. The violence of the harvesting had cracked open formations that had been sealed for billions of years. And what had been sleeping was starting to wake. Sarah Chen dove into her research with the intensity of obsession. She had to understand what had been done to her oceans. She had to find a way to help them heal. She descended into the Mariana Trench in a submersible, going deeper than any human had gone before. The changes were gradual. The volunteers found they could breathe underwater. They could sense the ocean's moods and currents. They could communicate with Thalassa directly, mind to mind. And they could shape water with their thoughts, bend it to their will, make it remember and react. The military applications were obvious. General Park, the head of the Terran Assembly, had initially been skeptical. But when Sarah demonstrated what the bonded humans could do, when she showed him ships grown from Thalassa's matter that could travel through space, powered by water that had been there since Earth's birth, he understood. "We can fight back," he had said, his voice filled with wonder and fear. "No," Sarah had corrected him. "We can ensure balance. There's a difference." The oceanic fleet had been built slowly, carefully. Each ship was grown rather than constructed, shaped by the combined will of Thalassa and its human partners. But now the harvesters were gone, and the water was healing already, purging the damage, remembering how to be whole. "We'll teach you," Sarah promised them. "How to wake your own ocean's consciousness. How to protect yourselves. You'll never be victims again." The song that rose from the ocean then was heard across the planet. It was a promise of a new future, a future where worlds could defend themselves, where exploitation would be met with resistance, where the powerful could no longer prey on the weak with impunity. The news reached Zorathian Prime 3 days later. The Collective's Council of Shareholders convened in emergency session. The loss of the Kefir 9 operation was significant but not crippling. They had insurance. They had other operations. What concerned them was the precedent. Executor Zondar, the crystalline being who led the collective, pulsed with colors that indicated deep thought. "We have a problem," he announced to the assembly. She paused, looking directly into the camera. 7 million of our people are dead. Hundreds of millions more are displaced. Our oceans are dying. And the galaxy has moved on. We're just another cautionary tale now, a lesson that other species will study in their history classes. Remember Earth, they'll say. Remember what happens when you trust the lesser species to know their place. Maria's voice hardened. We will remember. But not the lesson they think they taught us. We will remember that the stars are not kind. We will remember that justice doesn't exist beyond our atmosphere. We will remember that if we want to survive, we have to become stronger than we ever imagined possible. She stepped away from the podium without taking questions. The broadcast ended. Are you ready for what comes next? She asked, speaking aloud even though Thalassa could read her thoughts. The response came as feelings rather than words. Determination. Patience. The memory of 7 million deaths. The knowledge that other worlds were being harvested right now, other species being exploited, other oceans being murdered. We'll stop them, Sarah promised. But we'll do it right. We won't become monsters to fight monsters. Thalassa's response was complex, layered with meanings. It showed her images of other worlds, other oceans crying out in pain. It showed her the Zorathians continuing their business, moving from system to system, always taking, never giving back. It showed her the galactic economy built on exploitation and enforced by laws designed to protect the powerful, and it showed her something else, other entities like itself, sleeping in the deep places of other worlds, waiting for someone to wake them up. Earth was not unique. Had learned 15 years ago. The water always remembers. And now, it had learned to fight back. They packed up their harvesting ships and left within a week. They took their water and their profits and disappeared into the void of space. Behind them, they left an Earth with dying oceans, shattered coasts, and 7 million graves. The Galactic Council issued a formal apology to humanity. They expressed deep regrets about the tragedy. They promised to review their extraction regulations. They offered humanitarian aid in the form of water purification technology, as if that could somehow make up for what had been taken. Maria Santos stood before the cameras for her final press conference as president. She had aged 10 years in 6 months. Her hair had gone completely gray. Her hands still shook. "We were fools," she said simply. "We saw the stars and thought they were full of wonder. We didn't realize they were also full of predators. The Zorathians did to us what we once did to each other, they saw resources, not people. They saw profit, not life." The conference room in Geneva had never held so many world leaders at once. President Maria Santos of the United Earth Coalition stood at the podium, her hands shaking slightly as she looked at the holographic display floating before her. The alien delegation sat on the other side of the glass partition, their forms strange and unsettling to human eyes. The Zorathian representative, a creature that looked like a mass of floating crystal shards held together by some invisible force, pulsed with colors that the translation device interpreted as speech. "We offer your species a gift," the mechanical voice said. "A pathway to the stars. A future beyond your single world." Maria had read the proposal 17 times. She had consulted with scientists, economists, and military advisors. The offer seemed too good to be true, and her grandmother had always taught her that such offers usually were. But Earth was dying in its own way. Not from alien interference, but from humanity's own success. 15 years had passed since the day the oceans screamed. The world had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The coastal cities that survived the tsunamis had been abandoned. Humanity had moved inland, building new cities underground and in the mountains. The governments had collapsed and reformed into something harder, more unified. The United Earth Coalition was no more. In its place stood the Terran Assembly, a military council that ruled with absolute authority. The oceans were still dying, but slowly. The water that remained was sick, filled with dead zones where nothing could live. The beaches were graveyards of coral and bone. Fishing industries had collapsed. Rain patterns had become chaotic and unpredictable. Earth's climate was broken, perhaps permanently. "Remember," she told the new recruits, "we're not conquerors. We're not building an empire. We're restoring balance. Every world we help, we teach them to defend themselves. We wake their oceans, we show them how to partner with their planets, and then we leave. We're not saviors. We're teachers." One of the recruits, a young woman named Elena, raised her hand. "But what if the worlds don't have oceans like Earth? What if they can't wake their planets?" Sarah smiled. "Thalassa has taught me something important. Water is everywhere. It's in the ground, in the air, in the bodies of living things. Every planet with life has water. Some of them have consciousness sleeping in that water, waiting to wake. Others don't. But all of them can be defended if we teach them how. But gently, carefully." The crews were extracted and placed in emergency pods that were then pushed back into space. 7 harvesters and 12 support ships were dragged beneath the waves and dissolved, their atoms separated and scattered, returned to the natural cycle. Within 30 minutes, the Zorathian extraction operation had been completely erased. The alien crews floated in their pods, watching in horror as their billion-credit equipment simply ceased to exist. Then something else appeared in the space where their fleet had been. A message buoy, grown from water and minerals, pulsing with stored energy. Commander James Okoye's voice broadcast from the buoy in every galactic language. "We are the voice of the drowned worlds. We are the memory of stolen oceans. We are Earth, and we have not forgotten. This operation is ended. The water of Kefir, 9. Entirely human, though they were not entirely something else either. Growing stronger, Sarah said. More aware. Yesterday it asked me about the concept of revenge. What did you tell it? I told it the truth. That revenge is what you seek when justice is impossible. Marcus nodded slowly. Do you think it understands? It understands better than we do, Sarah said. It's been patient for 4 billion years. It can afford to be patient a little longer. The entity that humanity named Thalassa had responded. It had reached into Sarah's mind and seen everything, the hope of first contact, the betrayal of the Zorathians, the death of millions, the grief of survivors. It had understood that humanity were also victims. And it had made an offer. Symbiosis. Partnership. Humanity would become Thalassa's interface with the physical world. Thalassa would give humanity the power to ensure no world would suffer Earth's fate again. Together, they would be something new, something that the galaxy had never seen before. The joining had been voluntary. Sarah had been the first. Then Marcus. Then others. Thousands volunteered, then tens of thousands. They descended into the deep stations and opened themselves to Thalassa's presence. The entity touched their minds gently, carefully, sharing its power without overwhelming them. 8 billion people needed energy, and the fossil fuels were running out. The wars over resources were getting worse each year. Let me understand this correctly, Maria said, her voice steady despite her nerves. You want to harvest water from our oceans. In exchange, you give us fusion reactor technology and a seat on the Galactic Council. Correct, the Zorathian replied. Your oceans contain deuterium-rich water. It is common on your world but rare in our part of the galaxy. We need it for our industrial processes. You need energy technology to advance. This is what your species calls a win-win situation. Dr. James Okoye, Earth's chief science advisor, leaned forward from his seat. The proposal says you'll take 3% of the Pacific Ocean over 20 years. That's still a massive amount of water. What will happen to our climate? Our ecosystems? The Zorathian pulsed with what the translator called amusement. We have 7 million people died in 6 hours. Entire cities were erased from existence. Islands disappeared beneath the waves. The images that reached the rest of the world were apocalyptic, bodies floating among the debris, survivors clinging to rooftops, children crying for parents who would never answer. The world watched in horror. And so did the galaxy. The Zorathians had been broadcasting the entire operation on galactic channels, a documentary showing the integration of a primitive species into civilized society. The disaster was streamed live to 1 trillion viewers across 1,000 worlds. The galactic response was swift and utterly inadequate. The Zorathians were fined for excessive environmental disruption. The amount was calculated as 0.03% of their annual profit, roughly equivalent to a parking ticket for a billionaire. They paid it immediately and announced they were ceasing operations on Earth. He cut the transmission and turned to his crew. Battle stations. But remember, we're not here to kill anyone. We're here to restore what was stolen. Thalassa, are you ready? The response came as a pulse of blue light that filled the ship. Thalassa was ready. The oceans of Aquos were ready. And across the fleet, 30 ships full of humans bonded to a planetary consciousness prepared to show the galaxy what happened when water learned to fight back. The Zorathian military ships moved to intercept. They fired energy weapons, kinetic projectiles, everything in their arsenal. The weapons passed through the oceanic fleet ships like stones through water. The human vessels didn't have hulls in the conventional sense. They were water-given form, matter that could phase between states, shift between dimensions. The discovery had happened in the 8th month after the disaster. Sarah had been diving in the Mariana Trench, studying the damage the Zorathian extractors had caused. The machines had drilled deep, far deeper than they should have for water extraction. They had cracked open geological formations that had been sealed since Earth's formation. Inside those cracks, Sarah had found something impossible. A network of silicon-based structures that covered the entire planet, buried deep beneath the oceanic crust. It wasn't alive in any conventional sense, but it wasn't dead either. It was something in between, something that humanity had no words for. The structures were memory. Not metaphorical memory, but actual memory storage, quantum information encoded in crystal matrices. The oceans weren't just water. They had always been more than water. They were a data storage system, a consciousness distributed across the entire planet. Earth's true first inhabitant, older than life itself. But the marine life is already being affected, Sarah insisted. Whale migration patterns are disrupted. Fish populations are moving away from their normal territories. Temporary adjustments, the Zorathian said. The ecosystem will adapt. It always does. Sarah wanted to argue more, but the connection ended. She sat in her cabin, staring at her data, feeling helpless. She sent her reports to the United Earth Coalition, but they were filed away with reassurances that everything was under control. By the 4th month, the extraction rate had increased. The Zorathians claimed they were simply optimizing their processes, becoming more efficient. Sarah's instruments told a different story. They weren't taking 3% of the ocean. They were taking much, much more. She tried to raise the alarm, but no one wanted to listen. The fusion reactors were changing the world. Energy poverty was being eliminated. International conflicts over resources were de-escalating. The promise of. The fleet departed for Aquos with 30 ships. They arrived to find a dying world. The Zorathians had been extracting for 20 years. 3 of the planet's 5 oceans were gone, reduced to empty basins where cities once stood. The remaining 2 oceans were being harvested at maximum rate. The native population, a species of semi-aquatic humanoids, was down to less than 10 million from a pre-harvest population of 2 billion. The Zorathian fleet at Aquos was much larger than the one at Kefir 9. They had learned from the previous encounter. Their ships were positioned farther from the ocean, protected by multiple shield layers. They had brought military escort vessels. They were ready to fight. Species watched in horror. Others watched in hope. On the water world of Thalassia Prime, a civilization of amphibious beings who had been resisting Zorathian exploitation for decades saw the broadcasts and felt something they hadn't felt in years: hope. On the mining world of Aquos, where the collective had drained 3 of the planet's 5 oceans, the desperate survivors sent a message into space, praying someone would hear. The message reached Earth. Commander James Okoye read it in his office beneath the Pacific Ocean, surrounded by walls that pulsed with Thalassa's light. The message was simple: please help us. They're taking our last oceans. We're dying. James brought the message to the Terran Assembly. The military council debated for 2 days. Some argued that Earth wasn't ready to become the galaxy's police force. Others said that if they didn't act, they would be no better than the Galactic Council, watching injustice happen and doing nothing. She could extract oxygen directly from water now, filter it through her skin, breathe the ocean like the native creatures did. The Kefarians approached her cautiously. They were large creatures, similar to Earth's whales but with 4 long fins that they used like arms. They had been hiding in the deep places, traumatized by the violence of the extraction, watching their world being murdered and unable to stop it. Sarah opened her mind to them, using Thalassa as a bridge. She showed them what had happened to Earth. She showed them the pain and the death and the long path to recovery. She showed them that they were not alone anymore, that humanity had learned to hear the ocean's cries, and would come when called. The Kefarians sang back to her, a song of gratitude and grief and hope. Their ocean had been dying, just like Earth's. The extraction had created dead zones, disrupted their food chains, killed millions of their people. Interested. Earth was classified as a restricted zone. As long as humans stayed in their own system, they were someone else's problem. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the observation dome of Trench Station 1, the first permanent human settlement at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. The station was built partially from human materials and partially from something else, something grown. The walls were smooth and organic, pulsing with a faint blue light. Outside the transparent dome, the water glowed with the same light. She had been living down here for 13 years now, ever since her discovery had changed everything. She was 53 years old, but the deep ocean had changed her in subtle ways. Her skin had a faint shimmer to it. Her eyes could see colors that other humans couldn't. She could hold her breath for 30 minutes without effort. "How is it today?" Marcus asked, joining her at the dome. He had changed too, they all had. The people who worked with Thalassa were no longer. But Earth had gone silent to the galaxy. All communications with alien species had been cut off. The Galactic Council sent messages that went unanswered. Trading ships that approached Earth's orbit were turned away by automated defense satellites that humanity had built from salvaged alien technology. A few ships that ignored the warning simply disappeared. The galaxy forgot about Earth. It was easier that way. Just another failed integration, another primitive species that couldn't handle the reality of galactic civilization. The Zorathians continued their business on other worlds. The Council moved on to other matters. Earth became a footnote, a cautionary tale that diplomats referenced in trade negotiations, but the aliens who still maintained observation posts in the outer Sol system noticed things that troubled them. Reports filtered back to the Council, but they were largely ignored. Earth's electromagnetic emissions had changed. The planet was building. The Aquans signed the contract willingly, the Zorathian responded. They were fairly compensated. Their government signed, James corrected. A corrupt government that sold out its own people. The Aquans didn't sign anything. They just watched their world die. This is not your concern, human. You have no legal standing here. James leaned forward. Legal standing? You want to talk about legal standing? Fine. Let's talk about the 7 million humans you murdered 15 years ago. Let's talk about the fine you paid, 0.03% of your annual profit. Let's talk about justice that never came. We're done with your laws. We're done with your council. From now on, the oceans make the laws. Maria signed the treaty on a cold January morning. Her hand hurt from gripping the pen so tightly. Somewhere in the back of her mind, her grandmother's voice whispered a warning. She ignored it. The Zorathians arrived 3 weeks later. Their harvesting ships were enormous, each one the size of a small city. They positioned themselves over the Pacific Ocean, forming a grid pattern that stretched from Hawaii to Japan. The ships didn't float on the water. They hovered exactly 100 meters above the surface, held in place by technology that human scientists couldn't begin to understand. Dr. Sarah Chen watched from the deck of a research vessel as the extraction began. She was one of the world's leading oceanographers, and she had been assigned to monitor the harvesting process. The Zorathians had agreed to human observers. Everything was supposed to be transparent. They sang. The Aquans sang a song of grief and joy and disbelief, and Sarah heard it from orbit and wept. Because this was why they had done it. This was why humanity had partnered with Thalassa. Not for revenge. Not for power. But for this moment, when hope returned to a dying world. The Zorathian crews were placed in escape pods and sent back toward their home territory. They would arrive with a message: Earth had not forgiven. Earth had not forgotten. And Earth was coming for everyone who thought they could murder oceans without consequences. The galaxy was about to learn a new truth. The water remembers. And humanity had become the water's voice. We need time to discuss this among ourselves, Maria said. Of course, the Zorathian replied. But we must have an answer within 1 Earth week. We have other opportunities to pursue if your species declines. The threat was polite but clear. This chance might not come again. When the aliens left the room, the real debate began. It lasted for 4 days. The scientists were divided. The economists said Earth couldn't afford to refuse. The military warned about becoming dependent on alien technology. The environmental groups protested outside the building, holding signs that read, "Our oceans are not for sale," and "Don't trust the stars." In the end, desperation won. The energy crisis was real. The wars were real. The promise of fusion technology could save millions of lives, could unite humanity under a common purpose, could bring peace. Wasn't that worth 3% of one ocean? The vote was 53 to 27 in favor. "Contact the Zorathians," she ordered. "Give them a chance to leave peacefully." The communications officer opened a channel. "Zorathian Extraction Fleet, this is the Terran Oceanic Fleet. You are operating in violation of natural law. Cease your operations immediately and leave this system. This is your only warning." The response came quickly, filled with the alien equivalent of amusement. "Terran ship, we operate under full legal authority granted by the Galactic Council. You have no jurisdiction here. Leave immediately or face consequences." Sarah smiled, but there was no humor in it. "We gave them a chance. Thalassa, show them what consequences really look like." The ocean on the world below began to glow. All of it, the entire planetary ocean, lit up with blue light. The water rose up, defying gravity, reaching for the harvesters above. The Zorathians had just enough time to realize they had made a terrible mistake. Then the ocean claimed them, and they discovered what human it. Humans have developed capabilities that threaten our entire business model. They destroyed billion-credit equipment, one shareholder protested. "We should demand compensation from the Galactic Council." "The Council won't act," another shareholder said. "Earth is classified as restricted space. The humans are technically within their rights to defend worlds that call for help." "Did Kefir 9 call for help?" Zondar asked. There was uncomfortable silence. The Kefarians were pre-technological. They had no way to send distress signals that could be heard beyond their own world. By galactic law, they didn't qualify as a protected species. Their planet's resources were available for exploitation with proper licensing. "We followed every regulation," Zondar continued. "We have the proper permits. The humans have committed an act of piracy against a legal operation. We have grounds to press charges." Sarah stood on a beach in California, watching the water recede. The tide had gone out and hadn't come back. The exposed seafloor stretched for kilometers, littered with dead fish and dying coral. The smell was overwhelming. "They've taken 40%, Marcus said beside her, his voice hollow. "Not 3%. 40%. And they're still going. How did we let this happen?" Sarah whispered. "We trusted them," Marcus said. "We wanted to believe." The largest tsunami hit on a Tuesday morning. It was generated simultaneously from 3 different points in the Pacific, as if the ocean was collapsing in on itself. The waves converged on the Philippines, Indonesia, and Papua New Guinea. The death toll was immediate and catastrophic. Commander James Okoye stood on the bridge of his flagship, feeling the rage of the dying ocean below. Aquosa's water consciousness was weaker than Thalassa, younger, less experienced. But it was aware. It was in pain. And it was begging for help. "Open a channel to the Zorathian fleet," James ordered. The alien commander appeared on the screen, its crystalline form reflecting the lights of its bridge. "Human vessel, you are interfering with a legal operation. We are authorized by the Galactic Council to extract resources from this system. Leave immediately or face military consequences." "You've killed 2 billion people," James said quietly. "You've murdered 3 oceans. And you think you can hide behind legal authorization?" "And if we do?" another voice asked. If we make this official, we're admitting that we were vulnerable. That a single species that we abandoned 15 years ago can now threaten our entire network. What do you think that will do to our stock value? Zondar pulsed with the color of grudging agreement. The shareholder was right. The Zorathian collective's power came from the perception of invincibility. If other species realized they could fight back, if other worlds learned they didn't have to accept exploitation, the entire economic system would collapse. We need to handle this quietly, Zondar decided. Send diplomatic envoys to Earth. Offer them compensation for their grievances. Find out what they want. Negotiate a settlement before this escalates. But it was already too late for quiet handling. The story of Kefir 9 spread through the galactic communication networks. The footage of the ocean rising up to destroy the harvesters was being broadcast on 1,000 worlds. Something, but the technology didn't match any known patterns. Satellites detected strange energy signatures coming from the oceans, pulses of light that had no obvious source. Captain Vexlar of the Andorian Survey Corps was one of the few who paid attention to these reports. He was old for his species, his scales dulled with age, but his mind was still sharp. He had been studying humanity since before the disaster. He had warned the Council that the Zorathian extraction plan was dangerous, but no one had listened. Now he watched Earth from his hidden observation post near Jupiter, and what he saw made him afraid. Human ships were leaving Earth's orbit, but they didn't look like ships. They were organic, flowing, shaped like massive sea creatures. They didn't use conventional propulsion. They seemed to swim through space, leaving trails of luminescent particles behind them. What have they done? He whispered to himself. He tried to report his findings, but the Council was not. Were beautiful and terrifying, looking like massive jellyfish and whales, transparent membranes over structures that pulsed with blue light. They were armed, but not with conventional weapons. They carried the ocean's memory, and they could use it. The test came sooner than expected. A Zorathian scout ship entered Earth's orbit without permission. It was a small vessel, probably just checking on their former investment, making sure the dying world wasn't going to cause them any diplomatic problems. The ship never sent another transmission. Something rose from the Pacific Ocean, one of the new ships, massive and glowing. It moved like a living thing, fast and graceful. It reached the Zorathian scout in orbit within minutes, ignoring the laws of physics that should have applied to conventional spacecraft. The alien ship tried to flee, its engines burning at maximum power. It didn't matter. The human ship wrapped around it like a predator engulfing its prey. There was no. The water rose from Kefir 9 like a living creature reaching for the sky. It moved in impossible ways, forming tentacles kilometers long that wrapped around the Zorathian harvesters. The alien machines tried to activate their shields, but the water passed through the energy barriers as if they didn't exist. Water was already inside their ships, in their cooling systems, in their life support. Thalassa touched all of it at once. Sarah Chin stood on the bridge of the Terran flagship, her consciousness expanded beyond her body. She could feel every drop of water in the system, from the oceans of Kefir 9 to the moisture in the Zorathian crew members' bodies. It was overwhelming and intoxicating, this connection to something vast and ancient. "Don't kill them," she said aloud, though Thalassa could hear her thoughts. "We're not murderers. We're teachers." The water obeyed. The Zorathian ships were pulled down into the ocean of Kefir 9. What she found there would change everything. But that discovery was still months away. For now, humanity could only grieve and rage and swear that they would never be victims again. The galaxy had moved on. They had forgotten about Earth already. That would prove to be their mistake. The Zorathian fleet was disabled in minutes. Not destroyed, the humans kept their word, but rendered completely helpless. The military escort ships drifted, powerless. The harvesters hung in orbit like dead whales. Then came the part that would be remembered across the galaxy. Sarah Chen, channeling Thalassa's power, reached out to every drop of water the Zorathians had stolen from Aquos. The water remembered its home. The water wanted to return. The storage tanks on every Zorathian ship ruptured simultaneously. The water poured out, forming streams that flowed back down to Aquos, pulled by something stronger than gravity. It looked like rivers flowing upward from space, glowing blue, carrying home everything that had been stolen. Peace was too seductive. Who wanted to risk that over some fish swimming in different patterns? Then came the first tsunami. It hit the coast of Japan without warning, a wall of water 15 meters high. The earthquake detection systems had registered nothing. The waves simply appeared, as if the ocean itself had decided to rise up. 3,000 people died in the first hour. Sarah knew immediately what had caused it. The extraction had created an imbalance, a void in the ocean that nature was trying to fill. The water was rushing in from all directions, creating unpredictable pressure systems. "They're taking too much," she told anyone who would listen. "They're destabilizing the entire ocean." The Zorathians issued a statement expressing their condolences. They said the tsunami was a natural disaster, unrelated to their operations. They provided data that appeared to support their claim. The Galactic Council reviewed the incident and found no wrongdoing. The first month went smoothly. The Zorathians took their water, and in return, they delivered the first fusion reactor. It was installed in Brazil, and when it came online, it generated enough clean energy to power half of South America. The celebrations were broadcast worldwide. This was humanity's future. This was the dawn of a new age. The second month brought the first signs of trouble. Sarah noticed it before anyone else. The water temperature in the extraction zones was dropping faster than the models predicted. The salinity levels were changing. Ocean currents were shifting in strange ways. "We need to tell them to slow down," she said during a video conference with the Zorathian operation manager. The alien's response was patient, almost condescending. "Dr. Chen, we have extracted from hundreds of worlds. These fluctuations are well within normal parameters. Your monitoring equipment is simply not sophisticated enough to understand what you're seeing." Fights back. The Oceanic Fleet left Earth orbit 3 days later. 20 ships, looking like massive sea creatures swimming through the void. They traveled through slipspace using technology that was part human engineering, part Thalassa's inherent understanding of how water existed in multiple dimensions at once. The galaxy had no idea what was coming. The Zorathians continued their operations, confident in their power and their legal protections. They had harvested from hundreds of worlds. They were experts. They knew what they were doing. But they had never harvested from a world that learned to fight back. They had never faced an ocean that remembered its pain and chose revenge over submission. The fleet emerged from slipspace at the edge of the Kepler system. They could see the harvesters already, massive machines sucking water from the blue-green world below. Sarah stood on the bridge of the flagship, feeling Thalassa's presence in every drop of water around her. Explosion, no debris. The Zorathian ship simply disappeared, pulled down into the ocean. The water closed over it, and it was gone. Captain Vexlar watched this happen from his observation post. His scales paled with fear. He sent an urgent message to the Galactic Council. This time, they paid attention. The human response to the Council's inquiry was brief and direct. Commander James Okoye, a former naval officer who was now bonded with Thalassa, delivered it personally via subspace transmission. "We're busy. Do not disturb." But the Zorathian ship, the Council representative began. "Entered our space without permission," James interrupted. "It was handled. If you send more ships, they will be handled too. Earth is closed to all alien traffic until further notice. You can't just kidnap galactic citizens," the representative protested. James's expression didn't change. Behind him, visible through the window of the underwater station, Thalassa's light pulsed in rhythm with. But they didn't just return the water from the ships in orbit. Sarah reached further, across light years, to every Zorathian facility in the galaxy. She found the water from Aquos, separated it from all the other stolen water, and called it home. Across a dozen worlds, Zorathian storage facilities exploded as water simply decided to leave, to return to where it belonged. The water fell back into the empty ocean basins of Aquos. 3 dead oceans began to fill again, slowly, gradually. It would take years to fully recover, but the process had begun. The water was coming home. On the surface of Aquos, the surviving population emerged from their shelters and saw water falling from the sky like rain, but not rain. It was the ocean returning, drop by drop, remembering its home and refusing to be exiled any longer.
The Galactic Council convened an emergency session for the 3rd time in a month. The chamber was filled with representatives from 500 species, and for the first time in centuries, they were genuinely afraid. The holographic displays showed footage from aquaswater flowing backward from space, Zorathian ships disabled with surgical precision, and worst of all, storage facilities across the galaxy spontaneously rupturing as water decided to go home. Ambassador Torvin of the Andraxian Consortium spoke first. His species was one of the oldest in the galaxy, and his voice carried weight. We can no longer ignore what humanity has become. They have demonstrated the ability to strike anywhere water exists, that is everywhere, in our ships, our stations, our bodies. They committed an act of war against the Zorathian collective. Someone shouted from the back. We must respond with force. With what force? Torvin asked calmly. Our weapons cannot touch their ships. Our shields do not stop them. They move through space in ways our scientists cannot explain, and they can reach into our very blood if they choose to. What force would you suggest we use? The chamber fell silent. The truth was uncomfortable, but undeniable. Humanity had become something that the galaxy's military powers could not fight using conventional methods. They had partnered with something fundamental to the universe itself. Executor Xantha of the Zorathian Collective addressed the council via hologram. His crystalline form flickered with colors that indicated barely controlled rage. They have stolen from us. Billions of credits and equipment destroyed. Operations across the galaxy disrupted. We demand compensation. We demand justice. Justice, a new voice said. The council chamber's doors opened, and for the first time in 15 years, a human walked into the Galactic Council. Commander James Okoye wore the dark blue uniform of the Terran Oceanic Fleet. His skin had the faint shimmer that all bonded humans possessed. His eyes reflected light strangely, like looking at water. You want to talk about justice? James continued, walking calmly to the center of the chamber. Let's talk about it. You murdered 7 million of my people. You murdered 2 billion You've left 13 worlds dying or dead in your pursuit of profit. And when you were done, you paid fines that amounted to pocket change and moved on to your next victims. That's your justice. The humans were not authorized to address this council. Someone protested. I don't need your authorization, James said. I'm not here to ask permission. I'm here to tell you how things are going to be from now on. He touched a control on his wrist, and holographic displays filled the chamber. They showed the Zorathian operations across the Galaxy 23 active extraction sites, each one draining the oceans of worlds that had no way to defend themselves, each one leaving behind death and devastation. You built an economy on exploitation, James said. You created laws that protect the powerful and leave the weak to die. You call it civilization. We call it murder, and it ends now. You cannot dictate terms to this council. Xantha's hologram pulsed with aggressive colors. You are one species. We are 500. James smiled, but there was no humor in it. We're not one species anymore. We're humanity bonded with Thalassa, a planetary consciousness older than your entire civilization. We're also partnered with Kephanine's ocean and Aquas's ocean, and 12 other worlds that you people forgot about after you finished stealing from them. We're growing. Every world we help, every ocean we wake, becomes part of the network. How many of us do you think there will be in 10 years? 20 years? He walked closer to Xantha's hologram. But we're not here to conquer. We're here to offer you a choice. Reform or change your laws to actually protect worlds, or become unnecessary. We'll be the enforcement you should have been all along. The council erupted in chaos. Species shouted at each other, at James, the displays showing their carefully constructed economic systems being threatened. but some representatives were silent, thoughtful. They had been waiting for someone to challenge the status quo. They had watched too many worlds die under legal exploitation. Ambassador Torvin raised his hand for silence. Commander Okoye, what exactly are you proposing? The Thalassen Accords, James said. Simple rules that any civilized species should be able to follow. No resource extraction without genuine consent from the native population, not their corrupt governments, the actual people. Fair compensation that actually reflects the value of what's taken. Independent monitoring of all operations. And if these rules are broken, the Oceanic Fleet will respond. Will return what was stolen, and disable your ability to steal again. This is extortion. Someone shouted. No, James corrected. Extortion is what the Zorathians did to Earth. What we're offering is a chance to do better. Sign the accords, follow the rules, and we leave you alone. Break them, and face the consequences. And if we refuse to acknowledge your authority, Xanthar demanded. James turned to face the Zorathian S hologram directly. Then, we'll start with you. We'll visit every one of your extraction operations. We'll return every drop of water you've ever stolen. We'll disable every ship, every facility, every piece of equipment you use to murder oceans. And we'll do it all legally, because we're not bound by your laws. We're bound by something older, the right of worlds to live. The chamber fell silent again. The threat was clear and credible. Humanity had already proven they could do exactly what they threatened. The only question was whether the galaxy would accept the new reality or try to fight it. The galaxy changed in the months following the humbling of Zorathian Prime. The news spread faster than any ship could travel, carried on subspace channels, discussed in every trading post and diplomatic embassy across 500 worlds. Humanity had struck at one of the most powerful economic empires in known space, and brought them to their knees without firing a single shot, without killing a single person. The message was clear. The old rules no longer applied. The era of consequence-free exploitation was over. In the crystal halls of the Galactic Council, representatives met day after day to debate the new reality. The chamber that had once been dominated by the major economic powers now found itself listening to voices that had been ignored for centuries. Small worlds, exploited species, and forgotten colonies suddenly had representatives who spoke with confidence, knowing that there was finally someone who would enforce justice if the council would not. Ambassador Torvin stood before the assembly, his ancient form moving with careful dignity. We stand at a crossroads, he said. We can resist this change and face it, or we can embrace it and become what we should have been from the beginning. True council of equals. Not a marketplace where the powerful sell justice to the highest bidder. Executor Xanthar's hologram flickered in the chamber. The Zorathian leader looked diminished somehow, his crystalline form duller than before. His homeworld was struggling with the water shortage, forced to ration supplies, to close industrial facilities, to negotiate with other species for resources they had once simply taken. It was humiliating. It was also educational. The Zorathian collective will sign the Thalassen Accords, Xanthar announced. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. We have learned that some lessons can only be taught through experience. We understand now what we did to Earth and the other harvested worlds. The humans have proven that they will enforce their laws. Resistance is pointless. Adaptation is survival. One by one, the other major powers followed. Some genuinely believed in reform. Others simply recognized that they had no choice. Within 6 months, 140 species had signed the Thalassen Accords. The treaty became the foundation of a new galactic order, one where resource extraction required genuine consent, where exploitation was met with swift restitution, and where the Oceanic Fleet stood ready to enforce the rules. 20 species still refused. They were the most stubborn, the most invested in the old ways. They retreated to their own territories, built up their defenses, and swore they would never submit to human authority. The galaxy watched and waited to see what would happen. Sarah Chen stood in the memorial garden on Earth, built on the cliffs overlooking what had once been Los Angeles. The city was different, now partially underwater, partially built into the cliffs, a hybrid of human architecture and Thalass's organic structures. It was beautiful in a strange way, a testament to what could happen when two species truly partnered rather than one simply dominating the other. The memorial itself was simpler. Wall of polished stone with 7 million names carved into it. Each person who had died in the tsunami that followed the Zorathian extraction was remembered here. Sarah ran her fingers over the names, feeling the weight of all that death, all that loss. "Do you think we've done enough?" she asked Thalassa. The entity was always with her now, in her blood, in her thoughts, in every breath she took. Thalassa's response came as feelings and images. It showed her the 13 worlds they had helped, the oceans they had woken, the species they had saved from exploitation. It showed her the Zorathians living with less, learning humility, beginning to understand the consequences of their actions. It showed her a galaxy that was slowly, painfully, learning to be better. But it also showed her the work that remained, the 20 species that still refused to change, the countless worlds that had been exploited before humanity gained the power to intervene, the sleeping ocean consciousnesses on 100 planets that had not yet been awakened. The job was far from finished. "Then we keep going," Sarah said quietly. Commander James O'Coy found her there an hour later. He had aged well in the years since the bonding. The connection to Thalassa seemed to slow the body's decline, or perhaps simply changed it into something that aged differently. He looked tired but satisfied. "The Council has made it official," he said. "We're recognized as an independent enforcement body, not members of the Council, but not outside it either. We have the authority to intervene in cases of ecological violation without waiting for Council approval." "They gave us permission to be their conscience," Sarah said with a slight smile. "How generous of them. It's more than we had before, and it means our actions are legitimized. When we help a world, we're not pirates or vigilantes, we're officially authorized peacekeepers." Sarah nodded slowly. "What about the 20 holdouts?" "They're being careful. No major extraction operations, nothing that would give us a clear justification to intervene. They're testing boundaries, trying to figure out exactly what they can get away with. Then we watch them, and we wait, and the moment they cross the line, we show them what happens." 3 months later, the opportunity came. The Varaxian Consortium, one of the 20 holdouts, initiated an extraction operation on a pre-industrial water world called Haven. The native species were simple farmers and fishers, barely out of their Bronze Age. They had no concept of galactic law or property rights. The Varaxians claimed they had purchased extraction rights from a neighboring system that had discovered Haven first, a legal fiction that had been used for centuries to exploit primitive worlds. The oceanic fleet arrived at Haven within a week of the operation beginning. Sarah led 30 ships, a smaller force than the one that had gone to Zorathian Prime, but more than sufficient for the task. The Varaxian extraction vessels were smaller and less sophisticated than the Zorathian harvesters, but they were doing the same damage, sucking water from the ocean and leaving behind death and disruption. Varaxian vessels. "This is Commander Sarah Chen of the Terran Oceanic Fleet. You are operating without the consent of the native population of this world. Cease operations immediately and leave the system." The Varaxian response was defiant. "We operate under legal authority granted by the Galactic Survey Board. The natives of this world are pre-technological and do not qualify for species protections under Council law. You have no jurisdiction here." Sarah looked at James, who was commanding the second ship in the formation. They both knew this was a test case. How they handled Haven would set the precedent for all future interventions on primitive worlds. "Let me talk to the natives first," Sarah said. "If they want us to leave, we leave. If they want our help, we help. Their choice, not ours." She descended to Haven in a small craft, landing on a beach where dozens of the native people had gathered. They were humanoid in appearance, with scaled skin that shimmered in the sunlight and large eyes adapted for seeing underwater. They watched her approach with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Sarah knelt in the sand, making herself smaller, less threatening. She opened her mind, letting Thalassa help her communicate. The planet's ocean consciousness was young, barely aware, but it could still bridge the gap between species. Over the next week, the galaxy divided itself. 53 species signed the Thalassan Accords within days. They were mostly smaller powers, species that had been victims of exploitation themselves. Worlds that saw the Accords as protection rather than threat. They welcomed the idea of someone finally enforcing real justice. 20 species refused outright. They were the major economic powers, the ones who had built their wealth on extraction and exploitation. The Zorathian collective led the opposition, joined by mining consortiums, corporate empires, and military powers that saw humanity's rise as a threat to their dominance. The remaining species waited, watching, trying to determine which side would win. The galaxy held its breath. Sarah Chen returned to Earth after the council meeting. She descended into Trench Station 1, feeling the familiar comfort of Thalassa's presence. The entity had grown stronger, more aware, more complex. It was learning from every ocean they woke, every world they helped, building a network of consciousness that spanned multiple solar systems. "They're going to fight us," she told Thalassa. "The Zorathians and their allies. They're not going to give up their power without a war." Thalassa's response came as images and emotions. It showed her the truth that humans had forgotten violence was not strength, fear was not power, control was not victory. The oceans had been patient for 4 billion years. They could be patient longer, but they would not allow the murder to continue. "We need to hit them where it hurts," General Park said during the strategy session. The Terran assembly had gathered in the underwater command center, surrounded by walls that pulsed with blue light. "The Zorathian homeworld. Take out their central operations, and the rest of their network will collapse." "We're not invaders," Sarah protested. "We don't attack home worlds. They attacked ours." Park counted. 7 million dead. "Sarah, have you forgotten?" "I haven't forgotten," Sarah said quietly. "But if we become destroyers, if we start killing populations and destroying home worlds, we're no better than them. We lose what makes us different." James O'Coy spoke up. "There's a middle path. We don't destroy Zorathian Prime. We teach them the lesson they taught us. We take from them exactly what they took from Earth. Not to destroy them, but to make them understand." The room fell silent as they considered this. It was perfectly symmetrical, perfectly just. The Zorathians had taken 40% of Earth's oceans. Humanity would take 40% of theirs. Not to kill, not to conquer, but to teach, to make them live with the consequences of their own actions. The vote was unanimous. The Oceanic Fleet would strike at Zorathian Prime, but it would be an act of education, not war. The fleet assembled near Jupiter, 50 ships now, grown from Thalassa's matter, crewed by thousands of bonded humans. They were beautiful and terrible, looking like massive sea creatures made of living water and light. They moved in perfect coordination, swimming through space in formations that resembled schools of fish or pods of whales. Sarah led the fleet personally. She stood on the bridge of the flagship. Her consciousness expanded across all 50 ships, connected to every drop of water in the fleet. Behind her, Thalassa's presence filled the vessel, ancient and patient and absolutely determined. "Remember the mission," she broadcast to all ships. "We're not here to kill anyone. We're here to restore balance. We take exactly what they took from us, 40% of their ocean reserves, nothing more, nothing less, and we redistribute it to the 13 worlds they harvested." The fleet entered slipspace. The journey to Zorathian Prime took 3 days. When they emerged at the edge of the system, they found a substantial military force waiting for them. The Zorathians had been preparing for this confrontation. They had assembled their defensive fleet, 200 warships, armed with the galaxy's most advanced weapons. Xanthara's voice broadcast across all frequencies. "Human fleet, you are in violation of Zorathian territorial space. Leave immediately or face destruction." Sarah opened a return channel. "Executor Xanthar, we're here to collect a debt. 15 years ago, you took 40% of Earth's oceans. You killed 7 million of my people. You paid a fine that meant nothing to you and moved on. Today, you learn what it means to live with loss. You dare threaten our home world." Xanthar's colors shifted to aggressive red. "We will destroy you." "You can try," Sarah said calmly. "Fire when ready." The Zorathian fleet opened fire. Energy beams and missiles filled space, a devastating barrage that would have vaporized any conventional fleet. The weapons passed through the Oceanic Fleet, like throwing stones at water. The human ships didn't dodge, didn't activate shields. They simply let the weapons pass harmlessly through their forms. Then the Terran fleet moved. They swam through space, weaving between the Zorathian ships, moving too fast for conventional targeting systems to track. They didn't fire weapons. They didn't need to. Water existed everywhere in the Zorathian ships' cooling systems, in their cruise bodies, in the thin atmosphere of their home world below. Thalassa touched all of it at once. The Zorathian warships froze in space, their systems shut down by water that refused to be water anymore. That became ice or vapor or simply stopped conducting heat. Crew members collapsed as the fluid in their bodies stopped responding to their biological controls. Not dead, not injured, just unconscious, held in stasis by water that had learned to be selective about who it helped. In less than an hour, the entire Zorathian defensive fleet was disabled. 200 warships drifted in space, powerless, their crews sleeping peacefully, dreaming of oceans. Sarah took no pleasure in the victory. This wasn't about winning battles, it was about teaching lessons. She turned her attention to the planet below. Zorathian Prime was a crystal world, its surface covered in vast geometric structures that housed billions of the crystalline beings. But like most worlds, it had water, underground reserves, polar ice caps, atmospheric moisture. The Zorathians didn't live in water like humans did, but they needed it for their industrial processes, their agriculture, their very survival. Begin the extraction, Sarah ordered. 40%, measured exactly. And remember, we're not murdering their world. We're teaching them what they did to ours. The oceanic fleet descended into Zorathian Prime's atmosphere. Water began to rise from the underground reserves, from the ice caps, from the irrigation systems that fed their cities. It rose gently, carefully, pulled by Thalassus's will. The Zorathians watched in horror as their water supply began to disappear, but Sarah kept her promise. 40%, not a drop more, enough to cripple their economy, to force them to ration, to struggle, to live with less, enough to make them understand what they had done to Earth and 13 other worlds, but not enough to kill them, not enough to destroy their civilization. The water was stored in the oceanic fleet ships, held in suspension by Thalassus' power, and then the fleet began to move, traveling to the 13 worlds that the Zorathians had harvested. On each world, they released a portion of the stolen water. It wasn't the same water that had been taken that was impossible to fully recover, but it was water, clean and pure, given freely to help dying worlds heal. The Oquins received water. The Capharians received water. 11 other species whose names had been forgotten by the galaxy received water. They watched the human ships arrive and pour life back into their dying oceans, and they understood that something fundamental had changed in the universe. The strong could no longer prey on the weak with impunity. Justice, real justice, had finally arrived, and it came wearing the face of the species that had been victims themselves, that had learned to transform pain into purpose. When the oceanic fleet returned to Zorathian Prime one final time, Sarah broadcast a final message. Your military fleet will be released in 24 hours. Your crews are unharmed. Your home world still lives, but you will live with 40% less water, just as we have lived, just as the Oquins have lived, just as 13 other worlds have lived because of your greed. Maybe now you understand. Maybe now you'll think twice before you murder another ocean. The fleet departed, leaving behind a stunned galaxy and a humbled empire. The Zorathian collective's power was broken, not through destruction, but through justice. They would survive, but they would never forget. And neither would anyone else who thought they could steal from worlds without consequences.
The extractions continued. More tsunamis followed. Coastal cities around the Pacific began to evacuate. The death toll climbed. 10,000. 50,000. 100,000. Maria Santos demanded answers. She contacted the Galactic Council directly, bypassing the Zorathian representatives. The council was sympathetic but firm. The contract had been signed. The Zorathians were operating within the legal parameters of galactic law. If Earth wanted to break the contract, they would face severe penalties, including economic sanctions and expulsion from all galactic trade networks. By the 6th month, the situation had become a catastrophe. The Pacific Ocean had dropped by meters in some areas and risen in others. The climate systems that depended on stable ocean temperatures were failing. Hurricanes formed in places that had never seen them before. Drought struck regions that should have been in their rainy seasons. The water had taken its revenge. But revenge had transformed into something better: justice, balance, and the promise that no ocean would die unavenged again. The galaxy watched, learned, and changed. And in the deep places of 1,000 worlds, ancient consciousnesses stirred in their sleep, dreaming of the day they too might wake and find partners waiting to help them rise. She showed them everything. The death of 7 million humans. The long struggle to survive. The choice to partner rather than dominate. The decision to heal rather than destroy. She showed them a vision of what the galaxy could be, not a hierarchy of predators and prey, but a community of equals, each world sovereign, each species respected. You can keep fighting, she told them, and we will keep defeating you. Or you can join us in building something better. Your choice. The Corvan and Nexian leaders returned to their people changed. They had felt Thalassa's presence, experienced the depth of connection that was possible when species chose partnership over domination. Within a year, both had signed the launched a coordinated assault on Earth itself. They brought 500 warships, armed with weapons designed specifically to combat the oceanic fleet. They had studied humanity's tactics, developed countermeasures, convinced themselves they could win. They were wrong. The oceanic fleet didn't meet them in space. Instead, Thalassa reached out across the light years and touched the water in every Corvan and Nexian ship simultaneously. The invasion fleet found itself fighting against their own life support systems, their own bodies, the very moisture in their air. The battle was over before it began. But humanity did something that surprised the galaxy once again. They didn't destroy the defeated fleets. They didn't even imprison the crews. Instead, Sarah Chen brought the enemy commanders down to Earth, into the depths of the ocean, into Thalassa's presence. Images flowed between minds. Sarah showed them what the Vraxians were doing, how the extraction would kill their ocean, destroy their food supply, make their world uninhabitable. She showed them what had happened to Earth, to Aquos, to the other harvested worlds. And then she showed them what humanity could offer: help, protection, and the knowledge to defend themselves. The natives conferred among themselves in a language of whistles and clicks. Finally, their eldest approached Sarah. He pointed to the Vraxian ships in the sky, then made a gesture of pushing away. His meaning was clear. Make them leave, Sarah translated through Thalassa's help. Protect our ocean. Teach us to be strong. The 20 holdout species learned, one by one, that resistance was futile. Some learned through intervention, like the Vraxians. Others learned by watching, seeing operation after operation shut down, seeing their profits disappear. Within 2 years, 18 of the 20 had signed the Thalassan Accords. The final 2, the Corvan Unity and the Nexian Empire, refused to surrender. They were the most militaristic of the holdouts, species that had built their power through conquest rather than commerce. They saw humanity's rise as a challenge to be met with force. The war, when it came, was brief and decisive. The Corvan and Nexian fleets, combining their strength. The galaxy would remember them. Not as victims, but as martyrs to a cause they never chose but made possible anyway. They died in water and catastrophe. From their deaths came partnership, justice, and hope. Earth had reached the stars not as supplicants or conquerors, but as something new, guardians of the oceans, voices for the voiceless, partners with the ancient consciousness that had been sleeping beneath the waves since the planet's birth. And the galaxy, slowly but surely, was learning to follow their example. Sarah Chen walked away from the memorial as night fell. Behind her, the names glowed with soft blue light, illuminated by Thalassa's power. Ahead of her, the city lived and thrived, human and oceanic consciousness intertwined, building a future that neither species could have imagined alone. She turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the blue light of Thalassa's presence. They died so we would wake up. We woke up so no one else would have to die the same way. That's the best answer I can give. James nodded slowly. I'm retiring next month. Passing command to the next generation. They're ready. They understand what we're trying to build. Good, Sarah said. We're not supposed to do this forever. The point is to make ourselves unnecessary. To teach the galaxy to police itself, to value life, to choose partnership over domination. Will it work? In the long run? Sarah smiled. I think so. Thalassa thinks so. The network thinks so. We're not building an empire. We're building a culture. And cultures, once they take root, are very hard to kill. They stood together in silence, looking out over the hybrid city, the healing ocean, the world that had died and been reborn. The sun was setting, painting the sky in colors that Earth had not seen before. The bonding, blues and purples that came from Thalassa's presence in the atmosphere, a permanent reminder of the partnership. In orbit, the oceanic fleet maintained its watch. 50 ships, soon to be 100, crewed by humans who had chosen to become something more. They didn't patrol the galaxy like conquerors or police it like overlords. They watched and waited and responded when called, teachers and guardians and living reminders of what was possible when species chose to evolve. On the memorial wall, 7 million names caught the last light of day. Each name was a person, a life, a story cut short. But together, they represented something greater, the price of awakening, the cost of transformation, the foundation of a new age. Sarah stood and bowed to the elder. It will be done. The Vraxian extraction operation was dismantled within hours. Their ships were disabled, their equipment dissolved, their crews placed in emergency pods and sent back to their home territory. The water they had already taken was returned to Haven's ocean. The natives watched from the beaches, singing songs of gratitude and wonder. But Sarah didn't leave immediately. She spent weeks on Haven, working with the natives, teaching them about the galaxy they lived in, showing them how to wake their ocean's consciousness. It was a slower process than on other worlds. Haven's ocean was very young, still forming its sense of self. But with patience and care, contact was made. "Do you remember when we thought the stars would be our salvation?" he asked. "When we believed that meeting other species would make us better?" "I remember," Sarah said. "We were naive. But not entirely wrong. Meeting other species didn't make us better. But becoming something new, partnering with Thalassa, learning to hear the oceans, that changed everything." 7 million people died for this, James said quietly. "Was it worth it?" Sarah was silent for a long moment, her hand resting on the memorial wall. "That's not for me to say. But I know this, their deaths meant something. They died because the galaxy was broken. Now the galaxy is healing. Not perfect, not even close. But better. Moving in the right direction." The native people of Haven began to change, just as humanity had changed. They bonded with their ocean, became its partners, learned to sense its moods and needs. They would never be technological in the conventional sense, they didn't want that. But they would be able to defend their world, to say no when exploiters came calling, to choose their own future. This became the model for all future interventions. The oceanic fleet didn't just stop exploitation. They educated. They empowered. They woke sleeping consciousnesses and taught species how to partner with their own planets. Every world they helped became part of the growing network, a node in a web of connection that spanned the galaxy. Thalassan Accords. The last holdouts had fallen, not through conquest, but through conversion. 20 years after the disaster that killed 7 million humans, Sarah Chen stood once again at the memorial in what had been Los Angeles. She was 73 years old now, though she looked barely 50. The bonding with Thalassa had changed her in countless ways, extending her life, altering her body, expanding her consciousness. The galaxy had changed too. The Thalassan Accords were universal now, enforced not just by the oceanic fleet but by dozens of species who had learned to wake their own planetary consciousnesses. Earth was not alone anymore. There were 27 awakened ocean worlds, each one partnered with its native species, each one part of the network that Thalassa had begun. Galaxy was full of sleeping gods, and humanity had learned how to wake them. "One step at a time," Sarah said. "First, we become strong enough that no one can ignore us. Then we show them there's a better way." Marcus found her later in the observation dome. "The fleet is ready," he said. 20 ships. The council has approved the first mission. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked. "Kepher, 9. It's a water world. The Zorathians have 7 harvesters there, plus support ships. They've been extracting for 3 years. The native species are aquatic, non-technological. They're dying by the millions, and no one is listening to their distress calls. Sarah felt Thalassa's anger pulse through her. 7 harvesters. Just like the operation on Earth. The same pattern, the same exploitation, the same death. How long until we're in position? 2 weeks in slip space. The new ships are fast. Sarah nodded. Then let's go wake another ocean. Let's show the Zorathians what happens when the water. His heart beat. We didn't kidnap them. The ocean claimed them. The same ocean your precious Zorathians murdered. Consider it justice, not kidnapping. The Council will not tolerate. The Council will leave us alone, James said quietly. Or you'll discover just how much water exists in this galaxy. In your atmosphere. In your ships. In your bodies. Thalassa can reach all of it. Do you really want to test that? The transmission ended. The Council debated for weeks about how to respond. Some species called for military action. Others urged caution. In the end, they chose to do nothing. Earth's solar system was marked as restricted space, and the Council decided to wait and see what humanity would do next. Sarah walked through the corridors of Trench Station 1, feeling Thalassa's presence all around her. It was in the walls, in the water, in her own blood. They were truly bonded now, human and planetary consciousness, separate but together. Sleeping and dreaming in the deep places. The violence of the extraction had broken its sleep. The pain of the dying ocean had given it focus. The death of 7 million humans had given it purpose. It was waking up, and it was angry. But humanity had made a choice that would define their species forever. When Sarah had made contact with the entity, when she had felt its rage and its grief, she hadn't run. She hadn't tried to destroy it or contain it. Instead, she had done something that surprised even herself. She had apologized. She had shown it humanity's own pain. She had offered it understanding. The entity that humanity named Thalassa had responded. It had reached into Sarah's mind and seen everything, the hope of first contact, the betrayal of the Zorathians, the death of millions, the grief of survivors. It had understood that humanity were also victims. And it had made an offer. Resource extraction still happened, but it was consensual now. Species negotiated as equals. Primitive worlds were protected rather than exploited. The Galactic Council had reformed itself, becoming what it should have been from the beginning, a forum for cooperation rather than a marketplace for exploitation. The Zorathian collective still existed, but it was a shadow of its former self. They had adapted to the new reality, becoming cautious traders rather than ruthless extractors. Zondar had retired, replaced by a new generation of leaders who had grown up in the age of accountability. They would never forget the lesson that humanity had taught them. James Okoye joined Sarah at the memorial. He was old now, truly old, his hair white and his movements slow. Unlike Sarah, he had chosen to limit his bonding with Thalassa, to remain more human than hybrid. It was his choice, and it was respected.